Peter Pan. Deep in the heart of London was a house where the Darling family lived. Wendy Darling shared a nursery with her two younger brothers, John and Michael. At bedtime, Wendy told her brothers stories about a faraway place, Neverland. The hero of these stories was Peter Pan, a boy who never grew up. Peter's special friend was a tiny fairy called Tinker Bell. John and Michael loved to act out the stories in which Peter had wonderful adventures. One night, when the children were fast asleep, Peter Pan and Tinker Bell flew in through the nursery window. They had come to search for Peter's shadow. It had escaped at night before, while Peter was listening at the window to one of Wendy's stories. Just then, Wendy woke up. She was thrilled to meet Peter Pan and agreed to help him and Tinker Bell capture the mischievous shadow. Wendy told Peter that tonight was her last night in the nursery because she was growing up. Wendy was to have a bedroom of her own. Fly with me to Neverland, Peter urged. You never have to grow up there. Wendy agreed at once. As long as her brothers could come too. So Peter told Wendy, John, and Michael to each think a wonderful thought. Then she took Tinker Bell over them, sprinkled them with magic pixie dust. Before they knew it, the excited children were soaring high above the rooftops of London. While we'll take the second star to the right and fly straight on until morning, Peter called, leading the way. But by the time the children flew over the enchanted world of Neverland, all was not well. Tinkerbell was becoming jealous of Wendy. Peter seemed to like her far too much. Without waiting for the others, Tinkerbell flew straight to Peter's hideout. This was where her friends, the Lost Boys, also lived. The spiteful fairy told the Lost Boys that a terrible Wendy bird was heading their way, and that Peter had ordered them to attack it. When Peter and the Darling children flew into sight, the Lost Boys used their catapults and pea shooters to knock the Wendy bird out of the sky. Luckily, Peter managed to catch Wendy before she crashed to the ground. He was furious with Tinkerbell. As a punishment, he sent the naughty fairy away for a week. Later that day, Peter sent John, Michael, and the Lost Boys off to capture Indians, while he took Wendy on a tour of the island. The boys set off on their adventure soon arrived in a clearing in the middle of a wood. We must surround the enemy and take them by surprise, John whispered. But the Indians had disguised themselves as trees and took the boys by surprise. Instead, the boys were captured and taken back to the Indian village. Meanwhile, Peter had taken Wendy to a beautiful mermaid lagoon. Suddenly, Peter spotted a little rowboat in the distance. "Why, it's Captain Hook," he cried. Captain Hook was a wicked pirate and Peter's greatest enemy. Once, a fierce battle, Peter had cut off Hook's hand. The pirate now had a terrible steel hook sewn to his left wrist. A hungry crocodile had eaten the pirate's hand and had enjoyed his meal so much that he now followed Hook everywhere, hoping for a chance to gobble up the rest of him. Peter and Wendy followed Hook as he headed towards Skull Island. Peter was shook to see the Indian prince, Tiger Lily, in the boat too. He and Wendy watched as Hook tied the princess to a rock in the sea. Peter knew he had to help. "If you don't tell me where Peter Pan's hideout is," the wicked pirate snarled at Tiger Lily, "I'll leave you here to drown." Tiger Lily was frightened, but she refused to betray her friend. Suddenly, Peter flew down in front of Hook again. The captain cried, rushing at Peter with his sword. Up and down the rocky cliffs they fought. Then Hook slipped and only managed to grab hold of a rock to stop himself from falling into the sea. Down below, the crocodile snapped hungrily. Mr. Smee, the boatman, rushed over and pulled Hook into his rowing boat. As Mr. Smee hastily rowed back to the pirate ship, the crocodile was snapping right behind him. Peter and Wendy rescued Tiger Lily and took her home. The Indian chief had been very worried about his daughter and was overjoyed to see her safe. To thank Peter and John, Michael, and the Lost Boys, he set John, Michael, and the Lost Boys free and made Peter an honorary chief. At last, tired out after their adventures, Peter and the children returned to Peter's secret hideout. Meanwhile, Captain Hook was back on his ship, trying to get warm. He was furious that Peter Pan had outwitted him again. All of a sudden, Hook thought of a brilliant plan. He had discovered that Peter was cross with Tinkerbell and had sent her away for a week. So the wicked pirate ordered Mr. Smee to bring the little fairy to the ship that very night. That evening, Hook welcomed Tinkerbell on board his ship. He told her that he needed to help her catch Wendy. All she had to do was show Hook where Peter's hideout was. Tinkerbell was delighted to help. She dipped her toes in Hook's bottle of ink and danced across the map to Neverland. Her footprints clearly showed the way to Peter's hideout. Hook smiled. He grabbed Tinkerbell and locked her in a glass lantern. At last, he could get his revenge on Peter Pan once and for all. But at Peter's hideout, Wendy, John, and Michael were feeling homesick. "I want my mother," sobbed Michael. And although the Lost Boys didn't know what a mother was, they decided they wanted one too. So Wendy promised that they could all go back to her London home together. Peter didn't want to leave Neverland and grow up. He watched gloomily as his friends waved goodbye. "Goodbye, Peter," said Wendy. Before she left, "I'll never forget you." But Captain Hook and the other pirates were waiting outside the hideout. The pirates captured the children and took them back to Hook's ship, where they tied them to the ship's mast. Before Hook returned to the ship, he left a parcel for Peter. It had a label on it that said, "To Peter, with love from Wendy." Back on the ship, Hook snarled at the children. "You have a choice. Either sign your name in my book and join my pirate band, or walk the plank," he said. The boys liked the idea of becoming pirates, but Wendy didn't. "Peter Pan will save us," she said. Hook laughed loudly. "Peter Pan won't save you this time," he sneered. "We left a surprise present for him, a bomb. Very soon, he'll be blown out of Neverland forever." Hearing these words, Tinkerbell knew that she had to warn Peter. She struggled in her little glass prison. Suddenly, there was a loud crack. The glass lantern broke and Tinkerbell was free. The tiny fairy reached Peter's hideout just as he was about to open up the parcel. She grabbed the bomb, threw it away as she could. Seconds later, there was a huge explosion. Then Tinkerbell told Peter that Wendy and the others were in danger. Peter sped off to rescue them, with Tinkerbell close behind. Meanwhile, Hook had forced Wendy to walk the plank. Then, when she stepped off the end of the plank, everyone waited for the splash when she hit the water, but it never came. Peter Pan just arrived in time to lift Wendy safely back onto the ship. He then turned his face to the enemy. There was a loud clash of steel as Peter's dagger and Hook's sword met. Back and forth they went in the most terrible battle ever fought. Still fighting, they climbed back to the top of the ship's rigging. Hook lunged at Peter, who fought back, finally forcing the captain to slip and fall back. Waiting for him in the water below was a hungry crocodile. The children clapped and cheered as they watched. Hook trying to escape the crocodile's snapping jaws. Hook spotted Mr. Smee in the rowing boat and swam towards him. But the crocodile was right behind and catching up. As soon as Hook disappeared into the distance, Peter gave the order to raise the anchor. Then Tinkerbell sprinkled the pirate ship with magic pixie dust. In no time at all, the ship was soaring above Neverland and heading back to London. Soon, Wendy and John and Michael were safely back in the nursery. And up in the sky, silhouetted against the full moon, was the outline of the pirate ship. Peter Pan, Tinkerbell, and the Lost Boys, who were quite ready to grow up yet, were off on another wonderful adventure.